Hello World History class, it is Tuesday and we're going to be starting on page 390 and we're going to go to 395, so a lot of information kind of packed in here today. Some of it you can kind of just skim through, and then some of it we're going to focus in a little bit more on. So you can skim page 390 to 391, and then we're going to kind of focus in on what America, the inventions that Americans did. So in Britain, some of the more well-known inventions during this time was purifying metals and bettering the roads and the railroads. James Watt created the first steam engine. And moving on a little bit more, something that's a little bit more familiar to you all would be Robert Fulton made the first steam engine boat ship. And I'm sure you guys have seen kind of the only one that I can think of that's, I don't even think it's steam engine anymore, but the only thing that kind of would remind me of that, and that you guys are probably familiar with, is the Southern Belle in Chattanooga. Kind of has the same look. It's definitely not ran by a steam engine, but it has that same historic look of a ship that probably would have looked similar to back then. The Wright brothers created the first airplane. Orville and Wilbur Wright, I always have trouble saying his name, Orville and Wilbur Wright, created the first plane. And I'm going to send you guys, I've been to the Smithsonian's in Washington, D.C. a few times, and when I went to, it's called the National Air and Space Museum, and in that museum there was, I've not been there in a few years, so it might have changed by now, but there was an exhibit on the Wright brothers. It was very, very cool, and I got on before, and I looked, and there's a game you can play that you can make your own, like, model airplane. It's really neat, so I'm going to send you guys that. Henry Ford started mass production of an assembly line and created the first car. The science industry started changing during this time as well, and so did businesses and the living and working conditions. So, scientists discovered new things, such as Thomas Edison created the first light bulb during this time. And in business, they started making small business partnerships, and corporations became more common, and so did banks during this time. Corporations and banks. But sadly, a lot of these people who were coming to work here, a lot of them were immigrants, and a lot of the housing during this time was not good at all. They had terrible housing, and they had slums, and they were all crowded together. And they had terrible working conditions, terrible living conditions during this time. And during this time, young children went to work, so they didn't go to school, not often, not until when they were about 9, 10, they'd send them off to work, and they would work in these terrible, terrible conditions, very dirty, very unsafe conditions. This is also when you see chimney sweeps coming into play, where they would hire children to go sweep the chimneys, and you've probably seen that in Mary Poppins. If not, I'll send you a video from it, because it's probably the only one that I could think of that you guys would know of. In 1834, though, Parliament forbade the employment of children under 10 as chimney sweeps. So in America, most of the average workers were about 9, 10, but in England it might have been lower than that. So, just when you're having to do schoolwork, just remember you're not sweeping chimneys. So, and I'll send you guys some present day reforms of labor. Now we have labor unions that started. One of the ones that were a little bit more famous in the last few months even was one of the she was running for president candidate, and she's dropped out of the race now, but she was running for president. She used to be a teacher, and she actually had a teacher labor union, so that's a little bit more present day. But I'll send you guys a link to present day reforms of that, so you guys can look at that too. So this will probably be your heaviest day in world history. We're actually moving to some fun stuff, though, so I'm excited in the era that we're in. It's stuff that you guys probably have known about. I love this stuff. I think it's so interesting to look back and see just the amount of change that we've had in the last years.